that you've chosen to come back and visit again, or come to visit for the very first time. It's an honor to break God's word in front of you, hopefully for our good. I've warned a few of you that this is an odd sermon. I'm going to say that at least 3 times, that being one. But again, we don't skip stuff. We don't skip the hard parts of the Bible. So this is a continuation to some degree of last week. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king. God laid a burden on him, strengthened him enough to be patient and pray. He prayed for somewhere around 4 months, and all of a sudden the king, whom's food tester and wine tester and making sure the king doesn't get pointed position that Nehemiah had, he is sad in the presence of the king. And the king says, "Nehemiah, why are you so sad?" And it sounds like, what a great king. Well, just looking out for his buddy Nehemiah. No, probably not. He goes, "Should I be worried? Why are you sad? Did you have some food that's upset you? Or some wine that has upset you? Or Kool-Aid for all we know? I don't know." And so Nehemiah says, "Okay, God, I'll pray one more time real quick, and I'm going to ask the king big." And so he asked the king, "Why shouldn't I be sad? The place where my fathers are buried is in ruins." And again, I don't think the king had any two hoots about, I don't think he cared about Jerusalem at all. But those kings cared about burials. I mean, if nothing else, the pyramids of Egypt tell us that, right? And so, because God's hand was with him, the king says, "Yeah, that sounds great. When are you going to come back?" And we assume Nehemiah told him. But he sends Nehemiah to go help rebuild the walls and gives him safe passage. He gets the papers to say, "Hey, let me through. I'm with the king. And oh, by the way, the king wants you to give me all this lumber that I'm going to need to rebuild the walls of a city." And he gets there, and in secret, at night, he inspects the walls, right? We did that last week. That's bad news. The reason he inspected them at night is because he didn't want the people to know what God had laid on his heart. He didn't want the enemies of Jerusalem that had been harassing the people to get them to not build, because they had tried once before. He didn't want them to know what he was doing. So he had a plan. And then Nehemiah, God's spark plug, had a plan. And he started to work the plan. And the last week we ended by saying, and God, the people said, well, they saw that God's hand was on Nehemiah. And so they said, "May God strengthen our hands. Let's arise and build," right? Now, it'd be really cool if the annual meeting had a building involved in it, because this would be the perfect sermon for all that. So there's your review, getting in today a little bit. And if you're just a little bored, I'm starting to run on as I am apt to do. Read Nehemiah 3, and you pronounce the words, because I'm not going to do a whole lot of that today. But to establish unity among the people, Nehemiah says, "I have told them the hand of my God, and it had been on me for good." Probably told them about the king, probably told them what the king afforded him the privilege of doing, the resources. That hand of God is a recognition that God is initiating this process. Many of us have big dreams, and often we will blame God for them or give God credit. I don't know which it is. I've heard some, at Bible college, this is off script as usual, but we had a guy who believed that God told him to steal Bibles out of the Bible bookstore. Remember that guy? And he was giving them away. He was doing a good work for the Lord. But the bookstore wasn't real sure the message came from God. And so he was expelled from Bible college. God's hand, when it is God's hand, is recognizable by everybody, isn't it? Right? And again, I won't give you the story of our church, even our church building here, but God's hand was on that. We'll just believe that for now. God's the one initiating this activity among his people. God's hand is how the obstacles were removed to bring about the end that God desires. By his hand, he sustains and builds up and encourages the people in the work, which is often very hard and sometimes downright discouraging. But God's hand, the hand of God, the way in which God's already acted to help Nehemiah, was proof to the people that they should jump on board, right? So they respond, let us rise up and build. And as soon as they hear that God was with them, it says they strengthened their hands to do the work. And some of your Bibles will say, and God strengthened their hands to do the work. Either is fine with me. They encouraged themselves, or God encouraged them to get up and do something that they say they believe. All they needed to see was the hand of God. And now they're ready to join in. And they were probably singing, worshiping, raising their hands, praising God. They were full of hope. But there was a but. And in God's economy, quite often there's a but. Often they're awesome, but God. That's always a good one. This isn't a but God moment. This is the other kind. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant, and Geshem the Arab heard it, they jeered at us and despised us, verse 19 of chapter 2. Things were looking too good for the Jewish people as far as this evil trinity of people were concerned. And so they were full of contempt, and they're going to exert energy against Nehemiah and his plans and the people. And they say, what is this thing that you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king? And so they're accusing Nehemiah, basically trying to scare him. What is this thing you are doing? Well, if you're a student of the Bible, you've heard that before, like many times. I'm just going to give you a couple. It's when it comes up in the Bible, it's always, what is this thing, is a negative thing, always, right? It implies that the person has done something terribly wrong. Let's start in Genesis. Adam and Eve had sinned, hidden themselves, and God says, what is this thing you've done? In Genesis 3:13. When Abram, not yet Abraham, when Abram lied about his wife and got some other people involved in some sin that they did not want to be a part of, Pharaoh asked Abram the same question. What is this that you've done? In Genesis 12. Abimelech asked Isaac the same thing about the same sin that his dad committed in Genesis 26. When Laban deceived Jacob and made him marry Leah after 7 years of service instead of Rachel, Jacob said, what is this you've done? In Genesis 29. One non-Genesis one, Judges 2, verse 2, God rebuked the idolatry of Israel. So God says to the people, what is this you have done? And so when Sanballat says this, he's coming against the character of the leader of God's people, Nehemiah, the character of God's people, the Jews, and the very character of God in reality, implying that they've been deceitful and faithless. He's accusing them. So Nehemiah doesn't do what I do. He didn't pull out the letter from the king trying to prove his innocence. He didn't defend himself. He didn't do any of those things. He doesn't even argue with them, proclaiming his innocence. Instead, he says, the God of heaven will make us prosper. In chapter 2, verse 20. Nehemiah doesn't answer a fool according to his folly, Proverbs tells us. He doesn't start going over the law of the Persian Empire. He just says, God's going to make this happen. So, follow or get out of the way, basically. He says, God's going to make it happen. His people, God's people had just simply been surviving for so long. And God had a plan for them through Nehemiah that they would thrive. And Nehemiah wasn't going to let anything get in the way. The God of heaven is Nehemiah's announcement. It needs to be mine more often. Because the sovereignty of God is over everything. Many of you love your favorite channel of news. Doesn't matter which one it is. And the thing that I have to ask myself, I have a favorite, right, is do I or do I not believe in the sovereignty of God? Are things good? No. No, they're not good. Very few people would say that. Are we united as a nation, these United States of America? No. Oh my goodness, no. But God is sovereign. He raises up leaders to either bless his people or to discipline them, to get their attention so they'd come back to him. That's up to you, which one you think is happening. It's a phrase worth saying, the God of heaven. It's a phrase worth saying as we think about the sovereignty of God. Remind yourself who God is, and that's when, and should determine how we respond when we're attacked. Nehemiah is then very clear and direct with his opponents. He's not interested in trying to persuade them to join his mission, really. He just bluntly tells them they're wrong, saying, you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. We would say, this is none of your business. It's helpful to be clear and direct with people when they actively oppose God and his work. But we should also be in prayer for them. It's not God's will that any should perish, but that all would come to eternal life, Peter tells us. And so who knows? Our direct and committed response might even be the thing God uses to draw them to himself. We have to be careful about just writing everyone off, right? But think about Nehemiah. He not only counted the cost, because the thing he asked the king could have cost him his life very, very easily. But he took on the challenge. He wanted to see God work in ways he would have never thought possible had he remained in Susa with the king, right? He went from cupbearer to community activist to city leader and then to governor. But for Nehemiah, it was all about God's plan, not personal promotion. And we'll see that in the later chapters of the book. God's been at work among his people, so they commit themselves in unity to build. And that's really the focus of the next two chapters of Nehemiah. The wall encircling the city was a sign of its internal stability or a lack of it, and right now there was a lack. Jerusalem was socially, economically, and spiritually without structure or stability. It was in distress socially because of the continual oppression from the foreigners on the outside. There was no walls to protect themselves. It was certainly in distress economically because of the heavy tax burden placed on them by the remnant of the Persians. There was a time where they were slaves to them. Nehemiah 5 will tell us all about that. And then the nation was in distress spiritually because of its failure to separate from foreign nations. They disobeyed God and what he wanted of them. Ezra 9 tells us about that. The people of Judah needed to rebuild in every sense, physically, social, economic, spiritual rebuilding of the people. God's name is not mentioned once, for those of you who have already turned me off and have read Nehemiah 3. It's not mentioned once. But the sovereignty of God is in every verse. God's working his plan. The good hand of God. What does that look like? Then, well, the Bible tells us. What does the good hand of God look like for us? Right? We're out here in this outpost, Ogden Valley Community Church. A bunch of you are here because the churches you used to go to, there aren't any in the valley. And we're glad to have you, right? We're happy to have you. But what does it look like for the good hand of God to be at work? Pete is the elder who draws the short straw every year, and he'll explain the finances and run part of the meeting a little bit later. But part of that meeting is he's going to try to articulate the good hand of God is upon this place. Nehemiah's servant leadership sets the tone for the entire chapter. Nehemiah 3, I am going to read a verse. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers, the priests, and they built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and set its doors. They consecrated it as far as the Tower of the 100, as far as the Tower of Hananel. We'll stop there. And so Nehemiah is concerned about one thing, the glory of God, which includes the protection of God's people. Let us build up the wall of Jerusalem that we are no more a reproach, verse 17 of chapter 2 said. Verse 1 said that verse 3 of chapter 1 said that. He'll say it again in chapters 4 and 5. You see, the neighboring nations, the Gentiles, were despising and they mocked the Jews. pointing out their dilapidated condition of their city. And after all, the Jews claimed that their capital city was beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth. Psalm 48, verse 2, right? They said that God loved the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. If God loved, Psalm 87, verse 2. If God loved Jerusalem so much, why were the walls in ruin and the gates burned? Why was the holy city actually a reproach? Why didn't the Jews do something? The world today, especially the culture of America, we'll just say, by and large ignores the church. If they're going to give the church any attention, it's because there's a new scandal. And unfortunately, we keep giving them new scandals, right? They love to have apathy toward us, just be indifferent. Or if they do care, it's so that they can mock and criticize. If you're the people of God, unbelievers ask, why do your people behave so poorly? Often to each other. Need I remind you of the pandemic? Why is the church so weak? Whether Christians like it or not, we too are living in a day of reproach. I'm not going to claim that we're persecuted like many believers are around the world. I'm not going to claim that that's even close, or that the glory had departed. But there was a day that people who didn't go to church because they were afraid of it because it was so powerful and they knew it would change them. That is not today. The purpose of ministry is the glory of God, not the glory of its leaders or its organization. The words of Jesus in his high priestly prayer ought to motivate us for Christian ministry, right? He prayed, I have glorified you, God, my Father, in heaven, or on earth. I have finished the work which you gave me to do. Is that a prayer we can pray yet? And again, I'm not passing out guilt or condemnation today. If the Holy Spirit decides to do that, that's on him. That's between you and him. But can I say, God, I've finished the work you gave me to do? I can't say that yet. I've got more work to do. I want to do it well. I want to do it like Nehemiah. God has a special task for each of his children. And in the faithful, humble doing of that task, we glorify his name. Right? Who's cleaning up today? Who's cleaning up the kitchen today? Do we know? Edmondson's. Well, the dishes will be clean, number one, let me tell you. They do that well with the right heart. They're glorifying God today. They're glorifying God. Who led the women's candle making bazaar, right? If you did that well, you glorified God. Who's watching the kids right now? May they have a double blessing, right? It glorifies God to serve him in response to all that he's given us. I'll do it. Get it? All right, well, we'll just keep moving then. The people of Jerusalem had become accustomed to surviving. I don't even know if they noticed that the walls were ruined or in ruins. I have a hard time believing that. But sometimes we can get used to where we're at. And because it doesn't require us to change or be more committed in any way, shape, or form, we get downright cozy with it, don't we? Some people do. In many churches today, people are content with just the status quo. But when Nehemiah arrives on the scene, he challenges them to rebuild the city for the glory of God. All right, now we're getting to the funky part. You ready? Nehemiah was a leader who had a plan, and he worked his plan. 38 individual workers are listed here. 30 of them have names that are hard to pronounce, okay? 42 different groups of people are named and identified. There are also many workers whom Nehemiah did not name, but whose work and labor was important, right? Each worker, named or not, was assigned a place or a task. D.L. Moody said this, a great many people have got a false idea about the church. They've got the idea that the church is a place to rest in, to get into a nicely cushioned pew, contribute to the charities, listen to the minister, and do their share to keep the church out of bankruptcy. And that's all they want. Boy, I hope that's not true of us. I really do. And the idea of work for them is like the guy I talked about last week. He goes, I love work. I can sit and watch people work for hours. In 1 Corinthians 12 to 14, Paul uses the analogy and the metaphor of the church as a body. And every piece of the body has an important role. And one piece can't say to the other piece, we don't really need you. Right? And every member is important. Everyone who performs a function, it's critical to us, whether it feels critical or not. Everyone who walked through the doors today was greeted by somebody. At least I think that's probably true. That is our norm. And you know how much I know about all that? Nothing. I don't know anything about it. But I'm glad it happens. I'm sort of proud that it happens. I think in the right way. It's a task that makes, I think, this church unique in some senses. There are other very welcoming churches, I know that. But we use the gifts God has given us for the task that He leads us to, or our leaders take us to. And when I started understanding that I can't do everything, I don't know who's teaching the kids today. I think there's 3 groups back there right now. I have no idea who's doing that. But I know I trust the people that are in charge of knowing that. That frees me to do the stuff that I'm doing. And I wouldn't trade with them. And most of them wouldn't trade with me, right? So the people finished this difficult task because they obeyed the same leader. They kept their eyes on the same goal. They worked in unity together for the glory of God. The enemy outside the city didn't distract them, and the difficulties inside the city did not distract them from their God-given tasks. They're like Paul, who said in Philippians, this one thing I do, right? I press forward. Basically to the glory of God. The word built is used 6 times in Nehemiah 3, and it means rebuild. Repair is used 35 times. It means making more strong or firm. Nehemiah wasn't interested in a patch job. He wasn't looking for a quick fix on the walls. He was trying to establish them long term for the glory of God. And the people did their best, it would appear. The gates of Jerusalem had been destroyed by fire. Nehemiah 1:3 says that. Jeremiah 17 gives us a bigger picture of how that all happened. Some of Lamentations 1, I don't know if Pastor Ben covered that today or not. So Nehemiah gets a bunch of timber from the king's forest. He had new gates constructed. Verse 8 of chapter 2 told us that. They're put into place. We're not there yet. That's in chapter 6 and 7. But the gates were important to the safety of the people and it controlled who went in and out of the city. Right? If the Lord loves the gates of Zion, God's people ought to love the gates of Zion too. Locks and bars are mentioned 5 times in Nehemiah. And the locks with the sockets in which the bars were fitted, making it difficult for anyone outside to get inside when they were locked. It's pretty simple. So now we get a tour of the city. This is the really odd part of the sermon. There's 2. And here we go. But it's a lot like the church today. There's a lot of different people doing different things here. Let's try it. You ready? Here we go. God uses all kinds of people. All kinds. He mentions rulers and priests in verse 1, 12 through 19. Men and women, 12. Professional craftsmen, verses 8 and 32. And even people from outside the city in 2, 5, and 7. There was a place for everyone. Everyone had a job to do. God uses all kinds of people, right? Leaders must set the example. First verse of chapter 3. If anyone in the city should have been busy in the work, it was the priest, because the glory of God was at stake, and that was their calling. The high priest used his consecrated hands for manual labor. Pretty cool. And it shows he considered the work on the wall to be a ministry to the Lord. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God, 1 Corinthians 10:31 says. Eliashib enlisted other priests to work at the sheep gate. There's our first gate. Since the northeast corner of the city, since sacrifices came in the city that way, the priest had a little special interest in that because that's where the sacrifices that were going to be done in the temple, part of the project. Sad to say, Eliashib did not remain true to his calling, for later on, he He joins forces, if you will, with the enemy and created serious problems for Nehemiah. But that's not till the last chapter, so we got a little more than a month to get there. Some people who enthusiastically began their work, sometimes people drop out. Sometimes it's not a good fit. And even though they may feel like they failed, we just find a different place for them to serve, right? I mean, how many times in trying to recruit for children's ministry, it says, oh, I'm not good with children. And sometimes all they really mean by that is, oh, I do not like children. Eliashib's grandson married the daughter of Sanballat, one of the enemies. And that alliance influenced the high priest against the Jews. God uses all kinds of people. Leaders have to set the example. Some people will not work. Because, oh, finally, you're talking about me. Oh, no, I hope not. But verse 5 says that. Tekoa was a town about 11 miles from Jerusalem, and some of the people traveled to Jerusalem to assist in the work. What a contrast between the people and their nobles. The Tekoites built in 2 places on the wall, verse 5 and verse 27, while their nobles refused to work even in one place. These were white-collar aristocrats that were so important in their own eyes, they felt like they ought to just hire it all done. They were not going to perform manual labor. The Tekoites were not the only outsiders to go to Jerusalem to work on the wall. Men also came from Jericho, verse 2 of chapter 3, Gibeon and Mizpah, verse 7. Their loyalty to the nation of Israel, to Judah in this case, and their Lord was greater than their local interest. They were certainly safer back in their own communities, but they risked their lives to join the work of the Lord. Some people do more work than others. I'm not going to give you a report, but some people do more than other people do. Verse 11, 19, 21, 24, 27, verse 30. They were glad to lay down their tools when the job was finished. But some people, these people I just listed, they asked for additional assignments. It wasn't enough to say that we've done as much as others. They wanted to do as much as they could for as long as God enabled them. Some people work at home, in this case, near their home. Verse 10, verse 23, 28 to 30. 6 different sets of workers, plus an unknown number of priests, repaired the portions of the wall that were nearest to their own houses. Why do you think Nehemiah had them do that? Yeah, and it increased the property value, right? The HOA would have probably taken care of it. I don't know. But they knew they'd do a better job if it's what they had to look at every day. I think we follow his example sometimes. Christian service for us does begin in our home. That's a little bit of a stretch and a jump. I don't normally do that, but Nehemiah lends itself to it a great deal. Some people work harder than others. That's just the way it is. Verse 20, Baruch is the only worker of whom it is said that he had done his work earnestly, right? The Hebrew word earnest in there means to burn or glow. And maybe this guy was, ADHD or something. He just burned a lot of energy. He had at it, man. Give him a cup of coffee or whatever, an energy drink, and he was good to go. I think of Ecclesiastes 9. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Just interesting. Lazy workers not only rob themselves and the Lord, but they also rob their fellow workers. The boat always goes faster when everyone's rowing the same way. Well, Nehemiah, here's a tour of the city. You ready? Nehemiah lists his workstation with the sheep gate. That was the first one. I told you where that was, northeast corner. Then he moves counterclockwise around the whole city. So then there's the muster gate, is the easy way to say gate Hamifkad, which was next to the sheep gate and just above the east gate. Verse 29 tells us that. 10 gates and several towers and other landmarks are mentioned in this particular record of chapter 3. He describes the work on the north wall first, then he goes to the west wall, then southern wall, and then finally the eastern wall, verses 15 to 32. His purpose really is to document for posterity the faithfulness of God to the faithful people of God in the city of God. He wanted the world to know that God was in this. This isn't a testimony to Nehemiah, at least originally. It was a humble servant said, God, I'll do whatever you want. And God did a lot more through him than I think he could have ever hoped for. So here's the gates, right? Here we go. Sheep gate, Nehemiah 1, Nehemiah 3:1, also verse 32. It was through this gate that the animals were brought in, like I said before, for the temple sacrifices. That's why the priests were so interested in this. And not only, this is the only gate that's recorded that it was also sanctified and it was set apart to God, probably because of that. John 5:2 mentions a sheep gate near the Bethesda pool. The fish gate, right? And they're not all going to be animals, don't get excited. Verse 3, was located to the west of the sheep gate. Between the two stood the Tower of the 100, or Hamiah, and the Tower of Hananiel. These two towers were part of the city's defense system and were close to the citadel, where soldiers guarded the temple and protected the northern approach to the city. Merchants used this gate when they brought fish from the Mediterranean Sea. And so there's probably a fish market somewhere close to the gate there. In any event, it was the main public entrance into the city. Then there's the old gate in verse 6, probably also called the corner gate, like it's described in 2 Kings 14 or Jeremiah 31. Some students identify this with the Mishnah gate, a Hebrew word that means second quarter or new quarter. In Nehemiah's day, this section was the new quarter, and this gate led into it. Then there's the valley gate in verse 13. This is where Nehemiah began his evening investigation of the ruins of the city back in chapter 2, verse 13. And I know you're just kind of following along today. We don't normally do that if you're visiting. We don't normally do that. It was located in the southwest corner of the city, about 500 yards from the Dung Gate, everybody's favorite gate. And both opened up into the valley of Hinnom. The workers were not only restored the gate, but they also repaired the section of the wall between the two gates. It was severely damaged 1,700 feet. Some of you guys are still watching football, maybe a couple ladies, and that's a long way if you translate it into football fields. Then there's the Dung Gate, verse 14, southernmost point of the city, near the pool of Siloam. It was the main exit into that same valley where the city disposed of its garbage. The word Gehenna means the valley of Hinnom, and identified the area where Jesus used it as a picture of hell, where the worm does not die, nor the fire is ever quenched, in Mark 9:44. King Manasseh had sacrificed children to the idols in that valley. 2 Chronicles 33 tells us that. King Josiah had desecrated the place by turning it into a rubbish heap in 2 Kings 23. The sanitary disposal of waste isn't the most glamorous job, but it's essential to the health of any city. The gate did not have a beautiful name, but it did perform an important service. It got rid of what would have defiled them. There's a spiritual lesson in there too. Get rid of what defiles us. Then there's the fountain gate, verse 15. It's on the east wall, just north of the Dung Gate. Very strategic location near that pool of Siloam, the old city of David. There's a water tunnel built by King Hezekiah. Some of you have been through that tunnel as you visited the Holy Land. 2 Kings 20 talks about that. The spring there fed the water system and was an important source of water in the city. That's the fountain gate. Then there's the water gate, and not the one for Nixon, but a different one. Verse 26, and it led from the old city of David to the Gihon Spring, located adjacent to the Kidron Valley. Jerusalem was one of the few great cities of antiquity that was not built near a great river. And so the city depended on reservoirs and springs for its water. The text doesn't tell us if this gate was repaired or not, but only that the workers repaired the walls adjacent to it. The name of the people that did that means that those who were given, they were probably temple servants, descendants of the Gibeonites who were made as water carriers, right? Joshua 9 talks about that. They would naturally want to live near the most important water source of the city. Then there's the Ophel, verses 26 to 27. It's a hill south of the temple area, and it was between the horse gate and the water gate, okay? It was especially fortified, and it had a tower. Temple servants lived there, and it was very close to the water supply. And again, there's some military stuff starting to happen. You can kind of feel that. Then there's the horse gate, verse 28, near the water gate, adjacent to the temple area. It's where the wicked king Athaliah was executed in 2 Chronicles 23. God warned his people not to trust in horses and in chariots. And yet King Solomon had all these horses imported from Egypt. 1 Kings 10 tells us that. That was an important part of the nation's defensive system. Significant that the priest also repaired this gate as well as the sheep gate. Both were closest to the temple. The east gate, in verse 29, we're almost done, led directly to the temple and probably is what's known today as the Golden Gate. Tradition tells us that Jesus entered the temple on Palm Sunday through this particular gate. In the 16th century, the gate was sealed up with blocks of stone by a Turkish sultan. And Jewish and Christian tradition both connect the Golden Gate with the coming of Messiah back to Jerusalem, and Muslims associate it with future judgment. So it's an important gate to a lot of religions. Ezekiel saw the glory of the Lord depart from the temple, from this gate, the east gate. Ezekiel 10 and 11. And the Lord will return to the city the same way. Ezekiel 43. So we have every reason to associate this gate with the coming of the Lord. And it's to remind us that one of the reasons we work as in response to all that God has done for us is that he's coming back, right? He's going to take care of us, and so that we can be where he is. And so 1 John says, abide in him, so that when he appears, we may have confidence and not be ashamed before him at his coming. One more gate, or that I'm going to cover. Gate Ham-if-Kad in verse 31, northeast corner of the city. Military connotation refers to the mustering of troops for numbering and inspection. The NIV Bibles and NASB Bibles both translated the inspection gate. It's where the army was reviewed and registered. The north side of Jerusalem was the most vulnerable to attack, and so that was the logical place to locate the army. So Nehemiah doesn't mention the gate of Ephraim, like Nehemiah 8 does, or Nehemiah 12, or the gate of the guard in chapter 12, verse 39. The Ephraim may have been on the north wall looking toward Ephraim. The later was probably associated in some way with the inspection gate, and it may have included both gates in Nehemiah's report. Some Bibles translated the prison gate. So it may have been the court of the guard, which is named in verse 25 here. So then Nehemiah goes all the way, he's gone all the way around the city, counterclockwise, and he gives a report back to the sheep gate, right? So he ends where he started, and no person or even groups of people could have accomplished the wall restoration and rebuilding without the hand of God on them. What an incredible, difficult task. And they did it in 52 days. Try to get a general contractor to come to your house, right? See how that goes. God's hand was with them. Now, it took leadership on Nehemiah's part. It took unified submission to God's leadership by the people. But it's just amazing what they were able to do. When I think of our church, I do think of 1 Corinthians 15:58. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Third time, you ready? What an odd sermon. But these gates had a purpose, and they made the city function well. At Ogden Valley Community Church, I view our ministries as gates, not so much to keep people out, but as important ways for people to come in. And I thought I'd do a partial prep for the annual meeting by just walking through our gates. And again, it will not take long. We're going to do just fine time-wise. But as we transition, and again, you'll have an opportunity to leave, escape, or whatever, but as we transition into the annual meeting, it is significant that we dare not reduce this meeting to the approval of a budget and a really good guy to join our leadership team. We dare not do that. It's so much more than that, because God's hand, I believe, is on us. And he has given us a burden like he did Nehemiah. And we have risen up to build, which we can only do with God's help. Here goes. Our ministries are the method by which and the means by which God accomplishes his work in us and through us, to us and to our community. And so just briefly, here's our gates. Missions ministry. 10% of last year's budget will be listed as this year's missions ministry because we want to give at least 10%. That's our goal for missions near and far. We have both. We have near missions, far missions. A monthly mission report keeps us aware of that on one of the Sundays of the month. They claim it's always the third. They're mistaken. But we're happy for those mission reports. The prayer ministry, all kinds of stuff. Before the service starts, prayer happens. After the service ends, prayer happens. If you have physical or spiritual, sometimes financial, when a need happens and you want the church to pray, you usually get a hold of one of us, and we tell up to 3 prayer chains, prayer groups of people. There's a women's one. There's one that one of our near missionaries runs. Russ East takes care of, a pretty large one. And then there's the Friday morning men's prayer breakfast, which is a prayer ministry. And stuff like that happens through this particular gate. Children's ministry, nursery, toddlers, and depending on the size of the groups, in the old days we called them beginners and primaries. Is that close? We don't call them that. If there's 48 kindergartens, we move the pile, right? So we kind of balance it so we can recruit some children's workers. But we have groups of people, and there's child care at 9 o'clock so adults can come and have some Christian education. At 10 o'clock, we have them learn a little bit about what it's like to sit in big church, they call it. Then we dismiss them because we need their chairs, right? And we want them to have age-appropriate Christian education. Children's ministry is just amazing. Our grow classes and grow groups are Sunday at 9 a.m. One started today with Pastor Ben doing Lamentations. You guys, well, a handful of you love those classes. So much so that we have to use this room as a classroom because we don't fit in any other room. And then we have grow groups. There's a Monday grow group in Eden, a Wednesday group that's here called Rabbit Trails. And there's a second and fourth fellowship group that happens downtown for people that don't live in the valley. And we're looking to maybe add some groups. Some of you whose name I do not know, you should be in a group. But for that to happen, people have to arise and help us build through this gate. Connections ministry, part of the greeting, the announcements you heard today happen. Again, Pastor Ben cares for many of these as the liaison, but he has people who help them. I haven't pointed them out because I'll forget somebody and feel terrible. Our monthly newsletter, our sign-ups, which we're getting a little bit better at, which is desperately needed. Our greeters at the door. Someone is going to say, thanks for coming today when you leave, no matter when you leave, because we want you to know we're glad you were here. Connections. Our community ministries, one of our newer gates. It's helping the valley and the people of the valley. It's giving our people opportunities to serve others, park cleanups. We rooted a guy's tomato plants. We did a bunch of different things. We've shoveled snow. That is not an offer. But we have at times shoveled snow for some folks that ended up needing some help. Just being in the community. We have coaches from our church all over the community. Coaching sports teams, soccer and track and some other things. Cross-country biking, or mountain biking, I should say. We want to be in the community, part of our name. Hospitality ministry, one of your favorite gates, because you have something to drink and something to eat. And for a few of you, it's your largest meal of the day, it would appear, and so some of that's fine. But we also have, if you're sick any long term, our hospitality ministry takes care of cards. Make sure they cook meals for people who are down. And they're amazing. They're just amazing. The picnics, legendary picnics that we have, all part of a hospitality ministry. Women's ministry, they just had an event, the candle making things, and they had a painting thing, and they will bring in a speaker and have a little workshop over a couple of sessions and stuff. They just do some pretty cool things. And again, women's ministry is one of those prayer chain links. It's a good gate. Worship ministry. We have 5 different worship teams for our 10 o'clock services. Wednesday night lessons, we started again Wednesday night teaching guitar, ukulele, and bass. We had 19 people on our first night. It was loud in here. And they were in 5 different places across the building. Really pretty cool. Soundboard and projection also serves underneath the umbrella of this gate as well. Pulse Junior High and Senior High Ministry. We take care of our teenagers and teach age-appropriate teaching and socials. We want to get into more service projects. Our outreach ministry, our community ministry, really depends a lot on some of our teenagers. They show up and they do a great job. Security ministry, one you don't know about as much, but it keeps us safe. And though it doesn't happen very often, but occasionally they serve people that come in with unusually intense needs. And instead of bringing them into the larger thing, they will deal with them and try to serve them apart from that in extreme need. But they keep us safe. Facilities ministry, they take care of God's building and grounds. And finances, so we steward God's finances well. Elders and deacons, that's our version of servant leadership team. And I think you'll get to meet them in a few minutes. I started this sermon today talking about the hand of God. And do you see it here like I do? God has burdened many of you to lead and serve in these gated ministries. And yet, most of these gates need more people to serve and to help lead. Will you help us build our gates? Will you help us keep our gates healthy so we can glorify God powerfully in grace and truth? If you do so, I pray that God will strengthen your hands to do the work. If you'd like to be prayed with today, over here by the cross, a prayer team will be there to pray for you, pray with you, hear your request. If need be, get them to those other people who will pray throughout the week on your behalf. And again, unusual text today, unusual topic today. But if God is drawing you to himself in any way, shape, maybe for the first time or for a deeper walk with him the next time, come and be prayed with. And they'll do that and then put you in touch with people who may be able to help you spiritually beyond that, if that's what your need is. After my pray, we'll be dismissed. We'll take a 5 to 6 minute break. You guys are not good at short breaks. But in 5 to 6 minutes, we'll start our annual meeting. And thank you so much for being here today. God, we are grateful to have been in your house with your people, looking at your word, as I so often pray. But God, in particular today, I pray that you would help us see your heart like Nehemiah did. And God, I pray that you'd help us see your hand on us as individuals, as families, and as a church family, so that we might first be who you've called us to be. And then in response to all that you've done for us, we would do what you call us to do. And all God's people said, see you in 6 minutes.